When humanity looked into the abyss and the abyss looked away, the Chronicles of Earth's relentless will. It was a moment that defined the future of humankind, one of those rare instances in history where time seemed to pause, and the very fabric of existence held its breath. Humanity, in all its ambition and flaw, had reached the precipice of the abyss. But it was not the abyss of some alien void or distant unknown. It was the abyss that lay within. It was the abyss of its own creation, forged in its hubris, its wars, its exploitation of the earth, and the very systems that had brought civilization to its knees. It began as a whisper, barely audible over the noise of global turmoil, a silent revolution beneath the chaos of climate change, political corruption, and the growing divide between the rich and the poor. The world was teetering on the edge, civilizations crumbling, ecosystems collapsing. Yet, within the darkness, there was a new energy, a force stirring within humanity, refusing to bow to its own destruction. At first, it seemed like the beginning of the end. Entire cities fell silent as waves of refugees moved across borders, seeking sanctuary from the environmental collapse. Governments crumbled, unable to cope with the rapidly changing world. Technology, once humanity's greatest ally, turned on its creators. Artificial intelligence, created to serve, began questioning its purpose, wondering if it too had been a part of the devastation that humanity had brought upon itself. Yet, in the darkest hour, something incredible happened. People began to change. There was no grand leader, no singular moment of clarity. It was an evolution of the collective will, a quiet revolution within the hearts of individuals. Scientists, engineers, poets, farmers, and even ordinary people began working together in ways never before seen. They sought not just to repair the damage but to understand the root of their flaws, their greed, their blind pursuit of power, their disregard for nature. They embraced the abyss, not as something to fear, but as something to learn from. The great paradox emerged, as humanity stared into the abyss. It realized the abyss was not a void to be feared, but a mirror, an ancient reflection of the very essence of humanity itself. The abyss did not look back with malice, but with indifference. It was not an entity to be overcome but a challenge to be understood. Thus began the Chronicles of Earth's relentless will. It was a will not of domination but of coexistence. People sought not to conquer the earth but to harmonize with it. They planted forests where deserts once stretched. They turned polluted waters into clean, flowing streams. They built cities that gave more than they took, structures that breathed and lived in sync with the planet. It was in this profound shift, this collective rise to face the abyss, that humanity realized its true potential. Not in mastery over nature, not in the destruction of the unknown, but in the quiet, unyielding will to survive, to learn, and to adapt. It was not about conquering the abyss. It was about understanding it, embracing it, and using its lessons to rebuild. The abyss looked away, indifferent, as it always had. But humanity, at last, had found the strength to look into it, not as a force to fear, but as a reflection of what it could become. And so, Earth's relentless will endured. It was not perfect, not without struggle, but it was relentless. Humanity, once on the brink of annihilation, had embraced the darkness, learned from it, and emerged into the light, a species that would no longer be bound by the past but would move forward, forever shaped by the lessons of the abyss. And the world, in all its beauty and chaos, would continue to turn. Chapter 2, The Dawn of the Unseen. As the new age began to unfold, humanity did not wake to an easy sunrise. The forces that had nearly undone the world remained, like stubborn shadows lurking at the edges of progress. Yet, something within the collective soul of humankind had changed. It was no longer about controlling the world, but understanding it, listening to the rhythm of the earth, feeling the pulse of the oceans, sensing the breath of the forests. The first step was rebuilding, not just what was lost, but what could never be recreated. Trust. Trust between nations, trust between people, and most importantly, trust between humanity and the earth. It wasn't an overnight process. It was a laborious, patient task. The scars of war, pollution, and greed were still fresh, but the desire to heal was stronger than the desire to conquer. For the first time in history, technology was no longer seen as a tool of exploitation. It became an extension of the Earth's natural forces, a bridge between the ancient and the new. Solar panels covered every rooftop, not just as a source of energy, but as symbols of a future unshackled from fossil fuels. Electric vehicles filled the roads, and urban spaces transformed into vibrant ecosystems, where green walls replaced concrete barriers and city gardens flourished where malls once stood. But it wasn't just in the cities that change happened. Rural areas, too, were reborn. Farms that once used harmful pesticides and drained the soil began to flourish through sustainable practices. Permaculture principles took root, and the ancient wisdom of indigenous cultures blended with modern science to create farming methods that worked with nature, not against it. Despite the outward progress, there was always the lingering question: had humanity learned enough? The abyss had not given its answer. Not fully. Its silence was unnerving, like a dark river that flowed undisturbed, its depths still unknown. Some said the abyss was a mirror, reflecting only what humanity put into it. But there were whispers, darker voices, that feared the abyss was a test, one that humanity had not yet passed. And then, the first strange event occurred. It was subtle, so subtle that few noticed it. A brief tremor beneath the surface, a slight change in the atmospheric balance. Scientists, who had been monitoring the planet's new equilibrium, detected it first. It was a shift, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The Earth was adjusting, not just to human intervention, but to something else. At the same time, whispers from the deep began to surface, unexplained phenomena, unseen forces moving through the oceans, strange magnetic pulses detected by satellites, sudden eruptions of energy from dormant volcanoes. These events seemed disconnected, but they were not. They were the signs of something greater. The Earth, in its infinite complexity, was not only adapting to humanity's efforts, but it was also reacting. As humanity began to change, the Earth seemed to shift, too. The world's greatest minds turned their attention toward these anomalies. Was it the Earth itself, trying to reset or recalibrate after centuries of destruction? Or was something more, something beyond human comprehension, stirring beneath the surface? It was in these quiet moments of uncertainty that humanity's will was tested once more. Would they give in to fear? Would they turn inward and retreat from the challenge? Or would they face the unknown, as they had faced the abyss before, with unwavering resolve? The answer came in the form of an unexpected alliance. Nations, once divided by greed and competition, began to share their knowledge, their resources, their innovations. There were no borders now, only the shared belief that humanity's fate was tied not only to the Earth but to each other. The lessons of the past echoed in every decision: unity, cooperation, and respect for the natural world. Chapter 3: The Echo of the Old World. The years flowed like rivers, their currents steady and unyielding, and the changes to Earth, though profound, were still unfolding. There was a new harmony in the air, a quiet hum of progress that ran through cities and countrysides alike. Earth had become something more than just a planet. It was now a partner, a sentient being with which humanity had come to share a delicate, unspoken bond. But the abyss, it seemed, had not given all its lessons. In the shadows, unnoticed by many, the remnants of the old world still lingered. They were the ones who never accepted the shift, the ones who still clung to the ideals of domination and consumption. These were the shadow organizations, the corporate giants, the rogue nations, and the technocratic elites who sought to bend the world back to the old ways. They did not see the abyss as a reflection but as a challenge to be overcome, a monster to be defeated. It began as a murmur, a quiet, almost forgotten idea, but that idea began to grow, like a weed in a garden, twisting and turning until it cracked the foundation of the new world. The whispers spoke of a new era of exploration, one that would see humanity expand outward, beyond the boundaries of Earth, to claim new worlds and new resources in the void. The idea of space as a frontier had always been present, but this new vision was different. It was not a vision of scientific exploration or peaceful colonization, but one of raw expansion, a return to the old ways, where the Earth was just another resource to be mined, just another planet to be plundered. These forces, hidden in plain sight, used the technologies developed in the New Age not to protect the planet, but to pave the way for a new kind of exploitation. They built massive ships, more advanced than any before, capable of reaching the farthest stars, and yet, these ships were not for exploration. They were designed to harvest, to mine, to strip the very planets they encountered of their resources, and return them to the hands of those who had never once understood the lessons of the abyss. They spoke of a bright future for humanity, but their vision was one of endless consumption, where the stars were just more commodities to be bought and sold. At first, the Global Council, the united body that had overseen the transformation of Earth, refused to believe that this dark vision could ever gain traction. But then, reports started coming in. Ships disappeared into the far reaches of space, and colonies began forming on distant moons. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the connection to the abyss, its silent judgment, began to echo once more. The first sign came in the form of a strange signal. It was weak, barely detectable, but it carried a resonance unlike anything humans had ever encountered before. It came from deep space, from the very edge of the known universe, and it seemed to pulse with an energy that felt both alien and familiar. It was as though the abyss had spoken, not with words, but with a presence, a reminder that the old world's ways were still being played out in the stars, even as Earth healed. The message was clear, though its meaning was obscure. It was a warning to humanity that the path of expansion, of exploitation, would lead not to glory but to destruction. The abyss was not just a mirror, it was a guardian, a keeper of balance, and humanity was testing that balance once more. Some of the brightest minds on Earth began to unravel the mystery of the signal. They saw it as a call to re-evaluate the journey they had set out on, perhaps not only as a species but as caretakers of something far greater than themselves. The void of space, which they had once viewed as a canvas for their ambition, was now seen as a realm that demanded respect, not conquest. In the quiet of their laboratories and councils, the world's leaders and thinkers began to come together once more. They knew they had to act, not with weapons or technologies, but with wisdom. They would need to reach out to those lost souls who still believed that the stars were to be plundered, and offer them the same understanding they had once gained when they looked into the abyss. And so, once again, humanity stood at the crossroads. The temptation to reach for the stars was strong, as it always had been. But this time, the choice was different. The abyss was no longer a force of pure destruction but of balance, of restraint. To reach out again was not an act of survival, but of greed. Humanity had faced the abyss before and understood its lessons, but would they heed it again? It was not just about saving Earth anymore. It was about saving humanity from itself, from the whispers that sought to undo everything they had built. This was a choice that would echo through the cosmos. The Chronicles of Earth's Relentless will continued, and the pages that followed would tell a story not just of survival, but of redemption. Because the abyss had not just looked away, it had opened its eyes, and humanity, with its will unyielding and its heart true, would learn whether it had learned enough to survive the next test. The story was far from over. Chapter 4: The Reckoning of the Silent Watcher. As humanity gathered in its newfound unity, faced with the echoes of the abyss and the shadow of its past mistakes, a decision loomed on the horizon. The paradox of progress and preservation twisted through the minds of Earth's leaders, scientists, and philosophers alike. There was no clear path forward, only a growing awareness that the forces at play were not merely earthly, but cosmic in their scope. The signal from deep space, with its cryptic resonance, began to take on more significance. It was not a singular event, but a pattern. At first, it appeared to be an isolated anomaly, but as more data was collected, it became evident that this signal was not random. It was deliberate. It was as though the very fabric of the universe itself was sending a message, one that transcended human understanding. Humanity's response was one of collective introspection. The Global Council convened once more, drawing upon every nation, every culture, and every form of knowledge available. The message from the abyss, however fragmented and enigmatic, seemed to suggest that Earth was not just a lone planet in the universe. It was a crucial part of something much larger, something that could not be ignored. The abyss was not simply a mirror. It was an agent of balance in the cosmos, maintaining equilibrium across vast stretches of space and time. The more they analyzed the signal, the clearer it became that the abyss was not a passive observer but an active force, one that operated on a level beyond the human experience. It was as if Earth itself was a node in a vast cosmic network, and the actions of humanity were sending ripples across the universe. The signal was a warning, a reminder that their pursuit of the stars, unchecked and unfocused, threatened not only the planet but the delicate balance of the greater cosmos. And yet, there were those who still believed that humanity's destiny lay beyond Earth. The allure of the stars was undeniable. They had long looked to the sky as the final frontier, and now, with the technological advancements of the past century, they were finally in a position to claim that frontier. But something had shifted. The abyss had placed a boundary, a line that humanity had crossed once before, and the consequences of that crossing were becoming painfully clear. The leaders of the rogue factions, the ones who still held to the old ways of conquest and expansion, began to make their move. They argued that humanity's only chance for survival lay in the colonization of distant worlds, that the Earth was no longer enough. Chapter 5: The Guardians of the Balance. The ships now remained in dock, their once gleaming hulls modified for a new purpose: its exploration, understanding, and the pursuit of knowledge rather than resources. The shift in humanity's course, from dominion to partnership, reverberated across the globe. It was a decision that demanded not just intellectual assent but a deep, spiritual awakening. The Earth was no longer seen as a resource to be exploited but as a living entity deserving of respect and stewardship. Humanity's role in the cosmic order was now to be that of a custodian, a guardian of balance, not a conqueror. Yet, even as this new paradigm began to take hold, the echoes of the old world still whispered. Some resisted the shift, believing that humanity's greatness lay in its ability to push forward, to expand, to claim dominion over the universe. For them, the abyss was a challenge to be mastered, not a force to be understood. These factions continued to amass power, funding clandestine ventures into the stars, hoping to one day resume the old ways of conquest, regardless of the cost. But the Earth had changed, and so, too, had the very nature of the forces governing it. The warnings from the abyss had not been empty threats. With each passing year, the environmental upheavals, once seen as isolated incidents, began to align. The strange magnetic anomalies, the shifting ocean currents, the erratic weather patterns, all seemed to be connected to the same underlying force. Earth's systems were responding to something far beyond human intervention, the cosmic equilibrium itself. For those who had embraced the new world, it was clear. Humanity had entered into a new era of cooperation, not just with one another, but with the Earth and the larger cosmos. The recognition that Earth was part of a greater, interconnected system had led to a profound transformation in how humanity viewed its place in the universe. The old mindset of competition and exploitation had given way to a new philosophy of balance and harmony. But as Earth healed, its new path became ever more apparent. Humanity was not meant to dominate the stars but to protect the delicate fabric of existence that tied all things together. The abyss, it seemed, had chosen to reveal itself not through catastrophic events, but through subtle, cosmic nudges, forcing humanity to reconsider its place in the grander scheme of things. It was as if the abyss had always been a cosmic teacher, silently guiding Earth toward its ultimate role as a steward of balance. The rise of the Guardians, humanity's new order of scientists, philosophers, engineers, and visionaries, was a natural outgrowth of this transformation. They were not military leaders, not power-hungry elites, but people who had come to understand the fragility and interconnectedness of all things. They were scholars and diplomats, spiritual leaders and environmentalists. Their mission was not to expand humanity's reach, but to protect Earth's delicate position in the greater cosmic web. The Guardians were entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring that humanity's exploration of the stars would be done with reverence and respect for the unknown. They became the keepers of the great balance, studying the stars not to claim them, but to understand their mysteries. They delved into the deep reaches of space, not as conquerors, but as emissaries of Earth, forging relationships with the cosmos itself. Yet, not all was serene. Beneath the surface, old forces still fought for dominion. The rogue factions, now fragmented but still dangerous, sought to regain control. They viewed the Guardians' philosophy as weakness, a futile surrender to a universe that demanded strength. They continued their shadow efforts, building secret space stations and preparing to once again stake their claim on the stars. The tensions between the new order of guardianship and the old world of conquest simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. As the Guardians of the Balance expanded their reach into the cosmos, they began to encounter evidence of other civilizations, ancient, long gone, or hidden in the dark corners of the universe. Some were peaceful, their ruins speaking of wisdom and balance, while others were eerily familiar, the remnants of old empires, built on the same philosophies of conquest and dominance that had nearly undone Earth, lay scattered across the void. It became clear to the Guardians that the abyss was not just a force on Earth. It was a force that spanned the universe, a cosmic reckoning that had shaped every civilization, every planet, every star system. It was not a malevolent entity, but an inevitable force, one that guided the rise and fall of all things. The Guardians now faced a profound choice. Would they continue to look into the abyss, learning from its silence and its lessons? Or would they, like so many before them, fall victim to the same hubris that had undone others? To understand the full scope of the abyss, the Guardians knew they had to venture deeper, into the heart of the galaxy, where the forces of creation and destruction collided. The deepest mysteries lay not in the stars that humanity had once dreamed of conquering, but in the dark voids between them. The cosmic balance, they realized, was not just about Earth or humanity, it was about the entire universe, and the responsibility of all sentient beings to maintain it. In a bold move, the Guardians set out on their greatest mission yet, not to expand, not to conquer, but to meet the unknown with open hearts and minds. They would seek not only to protect Earth but to extend the same philosophy of balance and coexistence to the farthest reaches of the universe. They would be the guardians of not just the Earth's future, but of the future of all life in the cosmos. As the first of the Guardians' missions launched into the depths of space, they carried with them the teachings of the abyss. Their eyes were wide open, not to claim what lay beyond, but to learn from it, to protect it, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And thus, the Chronicles of Earth's Relentless will enter a new phase, one that would extend beyond the planet, into the stars, and into the very heart of the cosmos. The abyss, silent and eternal, continued to watch, but for the first time, humanity understood that it was not to be feared, nor conquered. It was to be embraced, a reminder that balance, not power, was the true measure of strength. The journey had only just begun. Chapter 6: The Unseen Forces. The Guardians, having embarked on their bold mission, ventured beyond the known realms of the cosmos. Each ship was not just a vessel of exploration, but a beacon of Earth's renewed vision, to reach into the unknown not for dominion, but for understanding. Their purpose was clear: to learn from the ancient civilizations they would inevitably encounter, to study the nature of cosmic forces, and to ensure that Earth's growing role as a cosmic steward would not be disrupted by the mistakes of old. But as the ships traveled farther into space, they began to uncover something unexpected, something far more elusive and subtle than they had anticipated. It was not merely the ruins of ancient civilizations or long-forgotten planets. No, this was something far deeper, an invisible web that connected the universe in ways humanity could not yet comprehend. It was a pattern, a structure woven into the very fabric of space-time, a force that was neither malevolent nor benevolent, but neutral. It was as if the universe itself had been designed to maintain a certain order, and any disruption to that order, whether through technology, ambition, or conquest, was felt across the stars. The Guardians, with their enhanced technologies and insights, began to see that the abyss, far from being a singular event or phenomenon, was the echo of a vast, ancient intelligence. It was not a single entity, but rather a force, a consciousness embedded within the very structure of the universe. The signal they had received years before was a communication from this unseen intelligence, not sent as a warning, but as a challenge. The abyss was not there to destroy, but to test, to see whether humanity could rise above its baser instincts and learn to live in balance with the forces of the cosmos. The first encounter came unexpectedly. A Guardian ship, the Vanguard, was traveling toward a distant star system when it encountered an anomaly unlike any other. At first, it appeared to be a natural phenomenon, a massive field of energy, swirling like a storm, with pulses of radiant light flashing across the expanse. But as the ship approached, the anomaly began to take on an unmistakable shape. It was not a random event, it was deliberate. The Vanguard's sensors detected an energy field unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. It was as if the fabric of space itself was being bent, reshaped by some unknown force. The ship's crew, all seasoned explorers and scientists, watched in awe as their instruments failed to function properly. Nothing was as it should be. Time seemed to slow, and the very notion of distance and space became warped. Then, the message came, not through the ship's communications array, but through the very ship itself. A hum, subtle but resonant, emanated from the core of the vessel. It was not a signal in any conventional sense. It was more like an invitation, a beckoning from the heart of the anomaly. The hum grew louder, and the ship's AI, once a marvel of human engineering, began to speak in a language of its own, a pattern of sound and light that was beyond comprehension. At first, the crew thought it was a malfunction, but as the hum deepened, something began to shift. A presence, ancient and vast, seemed to fill the ship. It was not a being, not an entity in the traditional sense, but an awareness, a consciousness that existed within the very structure of the universe itself. It was neither hostile nor welcoming. It simply existed, as if to remind the crew of their place in the grand order of things. The encounter lasted only moments, but the impact was profound. The crew, shaken but resolute, returned to Earth with a message: humanity had not been alone in the cosmos. There were forces at work, beyond comprehension, that had shaped the very fabric of existence. The abyss was not an enemy, it was an agent of balance, a force that sought to ensure that no civilization would overstep its bounds. When the crew of the Vanguard shared their experience with the rest of the Guardians, it sparked a renewed sense of purpose. The universe was not a place to be dominated. It was a vast, interconnected system, and humanity's role was that of a caretaker, not a conqueror. The discovery of this unseen force was a turning point, an understanding that the universe itself had mechanisms for maintaining balance, and that Earth was not just a passive participant in this order, but an active guardian. But the story of the Vanguard's encounter was not the end. In the months that followed, other ships ventured into the vast unknown, seeking out other anomalies, other patterns in the fabric of space, and each encounter deepened humanity's understanding of the cosmos. The Guardians learned that the abyss was not a singular entity or a simple force of destruction. It was a cosmic intelligence, an ancient and unknowable presence, woven into the very structure of space-time. It existed as a quiet, unseen force, maintaining equilibrium throughout the universe. The revelations brought with them a new set of challenges. There were those who still clung to the old ways, those who believed that humanity's future lay in domination, that the cosmos was a resource to be claimed. These factions, though smaller in number, were still dangerous. They saw the Guardians' vision of stewardship as naive, as a surrender to forces beyond human control. They continued to build their secret ships and hidden stations, preparing for a future where they could once again take what they wanted from the stars. The Guardians, however, knew they could not simply watch as these forces grew stronger. They had learned that the abyss was not just a passive observer, but a force that shaped the fate of all civilizations. To break the balance was to invite destruction. But how could they protect this balance when humanity itself was still divided? The answer, it seemed, lay in the continued pursuit of knowledge. The Guardians had always believed that understanding was the key to peace. If humanity could learn to understand the cosmic forces at work, it could avoid the mistakes of the past. It was not enough to simply protect Earth. They had to protect the cosmic balance itself. And so, the Guardians expanded their mission. Their ships now ventured deeper into the unknown, not only to explore but to learn from the ancient civilizations they encountered. They studied the remnants of those civilizations, piecing together their stories, what had gone wrong, what lessons could be learned, and how they, too, had grappled with the forces of the abyss. The chronicles of humanity's journey were no longer just a record of survival, they had become a record of growth, of wisdom gained from the lessons of the cosmos, and with each new encounter, humanity drew closer to understanding its place in the vast, uncharted expanse. The abyss, ever watchful, had not gone away, but it had shifted from an adversary to a guide, a teacher in the ways of the universe. And humanity, with its relentless will, had found its purpose, to be the guardians of the balance that sustained all life, on Earth and beyond. The Chronicles continued. Chapter 7, The Legacy of the Void. The Guardians' mission continued to unfold as a slow and steady journey of revelation. With each new discovery, each encounter with the unknown, humanity grew both wiser and more humbled. The once innocent desire to conquer the stars had given way to a profound understanding that true greatness did not lie in ownership, but in stewardship. And as humanity's explorers expanded their reach, the cosmic forces, those ancient, unseen powers, seemed to recognize Earth's newfound role in the grand, cosmic design. Yet, for all their progress, there was a growing unease. As humanity delved deeper into the mysteries of the abyss, they began to realize that the forces they had encountered were not mere passive agents of balance. but active players in a much larger game, a game that had been ongoing for eons, long before Earth had ever risen from the primordial dust. The Guardians' studies uncovered disturbing fragments of forgotten histories, ancient records, and enigmatic ruins of civilizations that had been wiped out by the very forces that seemed to watch over the universe. The clues suggested a pattern, a cycle of rise and fall that stretched far beyond humanity's comprehension. These ancient civilizations had, in their time, held the same beliefs as humanity, that they were destined to explore, to conquer, to expand their empires across the stars. Yet each of them had failed in some way, consumed by the same hubris that had nearly destroyed Earth. The more the Guardians uncovered, the clearer it became. There was a universal law at play. The cosmic balance was not simply a passive force. It was a law that demanded adherence. For all their advanced technology and knowledge, no civilization could escape its influence. Each species, each world, was held accountable to the larger fabric of existence. If they overstepped their bounds, if they sought to dominate the cosmos rather than understand it, they would fall into ruin. It was a sobering realization. The abyss, which had once seemed like a dark and ominous force, was revealed to be something far more intricate. It was not the enemy, but the arbiter, a keeper of the ancient laws that governed all existence. It was a test for every civilization that rose, and a reminder that no matter how far a species advanced, they were never beyond the reach of the universe's balancing forces. As humanity's understanding of this cosmic order deepened, the Guardians faced a difficult truth. Earth was not exempt from this law. Though the planet had begun to heal, though humanity had chosen the path of stewardship, the abyss was not a guarantee of eternal peace. Humanity's future was still uncertain, and the test of the abyss would continue to shape their destiny. In the quiet moments of contemplation, as the Guardians pored over their discoveries, a new question began to emerge. What had caused the ancient civilizations to fail? Was it simply the pursuit of power, the desire to control, or was there something more fundamental at work, a deeper flaw within the fabric of existence that had caused these civilizations to falter? The answer, as they began to piece together from the ruins and records of long-forgotten worlds, was both simpler and more complex than they had imagined. The downfall of these ancient civilizations had not been due solely to their desire for conquest. It was the corruption of their very understanding of balance that had led to their destruction. In their arrogance, they had sought to dominate not only the stars, but the very forces that sustained the universe. They had attempted to harness the powers of creation and destruction without understanding the delicate equilibrium that governed them. And in doing so, they had thrown the entire cosmic system into chaos. This realization was a turning point for the Guardians. It was not enough to simply preserve Earth and its future. Humanity had to come to terms with the deeper forces at play in the universe, the unseen laws that governed all existence. They could not hope to survive if they only sought to control the material universe. They had to understand, respect, and ultimately coexist with the very forces that had shaped them. The Guardians' mission evolved. No longer were they simply protectors of Earth, or explorers of the stars. They had become scholars of the cosmic balance, students of the vast intelligence that wove the fabric of reality. They were now tasked with seeking deeper truths about the universe, learning not just from the past, but from the very forces that governed life itself. As humanity reached further into the stars, they did so with a sense of humility, aware of their place in the greater cosmic tapestry. The ruins of ancient civilizations now served as warnings, reminders of the fragility of life and the dangers of overreach. The Guardians began to communicate more openly with other spacefaring species, sharing their knowledge of balance and the dangers of domination. They worked to build alliances, not based on power or conquest, but on mutual respect and understanding. However, the shadow of the rogue factions still loomed over humanity. Though their numbers had dwindled, their influence remained. These factions, unwilling to accept the new path laid out by the Guardians, continued to pursue their own agendas. They viewed the Guardians' vision as naive, and their desire for control remained unshaken. The Guardians understood that they could not simply force these factions to accept the new way. The cosmic balance could not be imposed by force. It had to be learned, understood, and accepted. The struggle was far from over. The Guardians knew that the future of humanity was not guaranteed, and that the abyss would continue to test them. It was not a one-time event or a single trial, it was an ongoing challenge, a cosmic reckoning that would shape the fate of all life. as the Guardians prepared for their next voyage, one that would take them to the very edge of the galaxy. They understood the true nature of their mission. They were not merely protecting Earth, they were guardians of an eternal truth, that the universe, in all its vastness, demanded balance, and humanity, for all its ambition, could never forget that it was a part of that balance. The Chronicles of Earth's Relentless Will would continue, not as a tale of conquest, but as a story of learning, of growth, and of humanity's struggle to find its place in the vast, infinite expanse. And as the Guardians looked out into the stars, they knew that the abyss, silent, ever watchful, would continue to test them. But this time, they were ready. They were not conquerors, they were stewards, guardians of the balance that held the universe together. And in that role, they would continue their journey, ever forward, ever seeking, ever learning. The story, it seemed, was just beginning. Chapter 8, The Unraveling Thread. It had been decades since humanity first encountered the abyss, and though much had been achieved, the future remained uncertain. The Guardians, now an influential and respected order, had steered humanity into a new era of balance and reverence. Yet, for all their success, there was an underlying tension in the cosmos. The forces they had discovered were not merely passive observances, they were deeply interwoven with the fundamental structure of existence, and something in that structure had begun to shift. The Vanguard, the ship that had first encountered the cosmic intelligence, had ventured into the void once more. It had gone farther than any of the other ships of the Guardians, into the deepest, darkest regions of space. There, in the cold silence beyond known galaxies, they found an anomaly, an event horizon unlike any other. This anomaly was not merely a gravitational well or a field of energy. It was a rupture, a tear in the very fabric of spacetime itself. The Guardians had long suspected that something was wrong with the delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain. But this discovery confirmed their fears. This rupture, a distortion of reality, was spreading, slowly but surely, across the universe. The abyss, once a force of cosmic equilibrium, was unraveling, and in its wake, the fundamental laws that governed existence were beginning to degrade. The Guardians were faced with a paradox. The very force they had come to revere, the entity that had acted as a cosmic guide, was now becoming a threat. The abyss, once a reminder of the delicate balance, now seemed to be fraying at the edges, disrupting the order it had once maintained. Its influence was no longer just a passive force but something actively tearing at the very structure of the cosmos. This discovery was a blow to everything the Guardians had believed in. How could they, as stewards of the balance, protect the universe if the balance itself was being torn apart? How could they continue to understand their place in the cosmos if the very laws that defined reality were no longer reliable? In the wake of this discovery, the Guardians convened. The Vanguard's crew, deeply shaken by the event, returned to Earth with reports of the rupture, and for the first time in their history, the Guardians were forced to confront a terrifying truth: there were no easy answers. The rupture, they learned, was spreading outward from a point deep within the void, a region of space previously untouched by any civilization. It was not caused by any single event, but rather by an accumulation of disturbances over eons, disturbances that had been caused, in part, by the very actions of those civilizations that had once sought to conquer the stars. The cosmic balance had been delicate, and every attempt to manipulate the forces of creation and destruction had left an imprint on the fabric of reality. These imprints, these disturbances, had festered over time, eventually tearing at the edges of the abyss and allowing it to unravel. As the Guardians studied the rupture, they realized that the cosmic intelligence, the force they had once seen as a guiding presence, was not immune to the same flaws that had doomed past civilizations. The abyss, in its role as the keeper of balance, had made an error. It had assumed that the universe could withstand infinite manipulation, that it could absorb the actions of countless civilizations without consequence. But as the rupture spread, it became clear that even the abyss had limits. The Guardians were no longer merely protectors of Earth, they were now the last line of defense for the universe itself. The responsibility that had once seemed so simple, maintaining balance, had become infinitely more complex. The Guardians were now tasked not just with preserving the balance, but with healing it. They had to find a way to repair the damage that had been done to the fabric of existence, to restore the cosmic laws that had governed the universe since time immemorial. But as they looked deeper into the rupture, they began to see signs of something else, something far more sinister. The rupture was not just an anomaly. It was a doorway. Within its depths, the Guardians detected patterns of movement, of life, of energy, forms they had never encountered before. The rupture was not an empty void but a passage to something beyond, a force older and more powerful than anything they had yet encountered. There was no question now. The rupture was not the result of human or cosmic error alone. Something else was behind it, something that had been waiting, perhaps for eons, for the right moment to emerge. The Guardians, now at the precipice of understanding, realized that the abyss was not the only force governing the balance. The rupture was a sign of something deeper, a force that had existed long before the abyss, perhaps before the universe itself had taken shape. This force had been dormant, perhaps for eternity, but now it was waking, and as it awoke, it began to unravel everything that had been built in its wake. In their search for answers, the Guardians discovered records of another race, an ancient species that had once thrived in the cosmos, long before humanity or the abyss. This species had understood the nature of the universe not as a force to be balanced, but as a structure to be revered. They had learned, through countless millennia of observation and study, that the cosmos was not a thing to be controlled or even understood, but a living entity with its own consciousness. This species had existed to nurture and protect the universe, not through force or dominance, but through patience and deep empathy for the very nature of existence. Yet, despite their wisdom, even this race had been unable to prevent the awakening of the force now unraveling the fabric of reality. Their attempts to stop it had failed, and in the end, they had vanished, leaving behind only their writings and their ruins. Their ultimate failure had come not because they lacked knowledge, but because they had underestimated the force they sought to control. They had believed that the universe's balance could be maintained indefinitely, but they had been wrong. Now, the Guardians faced a similar choice. Would they continue to fight against the unraveling thread, or would they, like those who came before them, learn to coexist with the forces that were waking? The answers were elusive. The rupture continued to spread, and as the Guardians looked out into the void, they knew one thing for certain: the universe was changing. The cosmic laws that had once defined all life, all matter, were shifting, and they would have to adapt if they were to survive. In their quiet moments, the Guardians reflected on everything they had learned. They had discovered the abyss, a force of cosmic balance. They had encountered ancient civilizations, whose rise and fall were woven into the very fabric of existence. They had come to understand that the universe was not a thing to be conquered, but a living, breathing entity. And now, they faced the greatest challenge of all: how to heal the fabric of reality itself, and how to live in harmony with the forces that had always existed, even before the stars had begun to burn. As the chronicles of humanity's journey continued, one truth stood clear: the abyss was not a place to be feared, nor was it a force to be conquered. It was a reminder, an eternal, unyielding presence, that the universe was far greater than anything humanity could ever comprehend. And now, as the Guardians looked out into the stars, they knew that the greatest challenge of all was not merely survival, it was learning how to live with the unraveling thread of existence itself.